discusses with anybody that he has in the White House is a matter for President Trump. We continue to work with the United States and continue to share intelligence with the United States, as we do with others around the world, because we are all working together to deal with the threats that we face.
British Prime Minister Theresa May doesn't sound all that concerned about whatever the president may have shared with Russia. We're joined right now by Herridge from the Fox News Channel. Catherine, good afternoon.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Is this, I see where the Australians have come forward, the British have come forward. Any lingering damage from these reports of what the president shared with Russia?
Well, the only people who really know what happened were inside that room. I can tell your listeners that it would be standard for the president to be talking about classified information with a country that is also working with us in a limited fashion, in this case Russia, to try and force ISIS out of Syria and Iraq. But I think one of the things that may have got lost in the conversation is that we have seen episodes where the past administration shared information, in this case also with the Russians, and there were very negative consequences. Information was shared in about the 2014 timeframe about some of the opposition to Assad on the ground because of the intermingling with ISIS fighters, and the Russians then bombed those locations. You probably remember also, and it was probably an honest error, a memo went out relating to Afghanistan, and it outed a CIA officer in the process by name, and they had to be removed for security reasons. So each administration has had issues this way, I guess I would put it this way, and it's just not clear to me, because intelligence is an art, not a science, whether the specificity of the information really gave away its source, or whether it just was alarming to an individual who felt that it was just a little too close to the edge. I mean, in simple terms, did President Trump say, oh, yeah, we got a guy in Raqqa who's, right inside the cell, and he knows that they're putting explosives in laptops? I don't know if that's what was said. That would be a problem, right?
Yeah, sure, sure.
But if it was, we've got some really strong intelligence about an operation to target aircraft into our country, putting explosives in laptops, and it's coming out of, this part of Syria or that part of Syria, that may not be that great either, because then there's a focus on an asset in that region. But I'm not sure that it would cross this threshold to compromising the source necessarily.
Catherine, here's a question that I haven't heard asked enough, and I mean, I've tried to watch several of the outlets at the press briefings and when they have an opportunity to get to the president. Whatever happened in that meeting with Kislyak is that somebody leaked that information. And then we turn right around and somebody leaks a memo that Comey supposedly had in a private file somewhere. Who's addressing the leak problem? It strikes me that has to be a fairly small circle of people who could have known what went on in the White House inner sanctum that day. And I've heard nothing about an investigation to get to the bottom of that.
Well, one of the things we know from our reporting is that President Trump was somewhat frustrated with the FBI in the sense that they were not putting the leak investigations, making them as much of a priority, or putting them ahead of the Russia case. I can say with almost certainty that there are leak investigations going on based on my experience and the type of information that was involved. But some of these leaks, quite frankly, are more embarrassing than they are necessarily damaging to national security. And the threshold for leaking is whether it damages national security or it damages a source or a method for collection.
I see. So in other words, something like the leaking of General Flynn's name would be considered more serious because that would rise to a felony, correct?
That is a very serious leak because American citizens have certain protections under the law if they're picked up in the course of gathering intelligence on foreign targets, which is what happened here. We were listening to the Russian ambassador's phone calls, and Flynn was talking to him as well as others, and he was picked up, and he normally would not be identified by name. But just in this new interview with the New York Times, Sally Yates, who was the Deputy Attorney General, who had that very noteworthy testimony a week ago, she confirmed that Flynn's name was not unmasked at any point that she saw the transcripts. It was right there. And those close to Flynn say that this is unusual, would normally be huge news if it wasn't for everything else going on, and that this, they feel, is more evidence that he had a target on his back. People were, it was a takedown.
Right.
Right. Simple terms, So,
yeah.
But all of this is quite, I think the good news here is that there's a growing call for the former FBI director to testify publicly. And I feel very confident that that is going to happen. And that's one of the great things about our system, because then the public can make up their own mind as to whether there's something there or whether it's sort of a media-created crisis.
Do you have time for one more quick question?
Yeah,
sure. So maybe in case my instincts are wrong on this, on the Comey memo, if he really felt something inappropriate was said to him by the president, I wonder why he wouldn't have brought that out in February instead of putting it in a memo and waiting 3 months until after he got fired.
I can't get inside the head of the individuals, right? Because I just couldn't know. It may be. Listen, he is not the first FBI director that's been engaged in an investigation that has not been popular with the White House. Think about the last administration and the Clinton emails, and think about Louis Freeh and the Clinton White House.
Mm-hmm.
So these are public servants who are used to pressures. So it's not clear to me whether, if this request was made in the way that the New York Times says it was made, whether he felt that it was prudent to document this and just put it into the file because it would become part of a pattern, or it was an eye-rolling episode, right?
Yeah.
I just can't really answer that with any degree of certainty. But certainly, we all know from our own personal experience that when there is something really dramatic that happens to us in the course of our employment, typically people speak up.
Yeah,
right.
Very true.
So especially if it's going to affect the outcome of something you're working on. So it's puzzling, and it's also puzzling, this testimony from the acting director, where he said there had been nothing to interfere, and that would certainly suggest that if the memo was written, it was on an extremely close hold. So it may well have been kind of like a personal insurance policy for Comey, because in March, final idea here, because we've thrown out a lot of ideas, but in March he had a conference in Boston, at a cybersecurity conference, and he sort of threw out, in a sort of odd way, I hope to be back because you're stuck with me for 6.5 more years.
Right.
Sort of an odd thing to say. It's like when you think your job is about to be eliminated, you say, I can't wait to hit retirement in this corporation. So it's a sort of an odd thing to say. And now when we look at the timeline, you have to wonder whether that was said because he felt very uneasy about some of the conversations he'd had with the president.
Could have been great insight.
So we're going to find out that's a great thing. I cannot wait for the public testimony.
Yeah.
It's going to be a great thing for people to really listen and make their own decisions, because I know from the emails I receive that people are engaged, and Americans are smart, and they can tell, they can really differentiate between what's real and what's spin and what's important.
Catherine Herridge, thanks so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Have a great day. Catherine Herridge from the Fox News Channel there with just some great insight for us. And I was thrilled to have an opportunity to get her on the air today because she's so close to several of these investigations. George, thanks for calling the program.
Mark, how you doing?
How are you?
No here,
yeah,
actually.
Buddy. You doing good?
Yeah, doing good.
Good.
Just been really busy and been following all of the stuff that you've been following very closely. And I agree with you about Comey having files on all these guys. Kind of like J. Edgar, there's no question on that. I just wanted to add something to this that goes a little higher than Comey. And you kind of stated it as far as Obama not really being in charge of the deep state. You inferred that Comey was in charge of Obama, which I agree with, by the way. I think that this deep state, it's not the bureaucracy that are appointed or hired officials in the government or the elected officials that we put in. These are all puppets. The people above all of this are largely the very few financial elite that run the entire planet including our country. And these are the globalist factions that Trump and Theresa May and the Brexit and all of that stuff is all about. Trump is the only president since JFK who has really bucked the system. Reagan tried to, but he almost got killed. You know, and the assassination attempt, I think, was enough to put Reagan back a little bit from what he really wanted to accomplish. Trump, I think, actually has the files, the goods, if you will, on everybody. And I'll go back to his father for a moment and remind people that Roy Cohn was his father's attorney.